Hey everybody, I am The Constant Way, and we've got Adepticon coming up, and the tournament pack has been released, so we know what maps are going to be played in both the 3v3 and the 5v5 tournaments. Now, the 3 should be a great intro, and anybody should be able to jump in and get right to it, but the 5s might be intimidating if you haven't played much, so I wanted to do an overview of the maps that we'll be playing so folks get a chance to maybe familiarize themselves a little bit before jumping on in, and hopefully feel comfortable joining the Shark Pool. Is that a thing? Shark pools? I don't know. Let's move on. So round one, we're looking at vassal map number 2. We're going to break down these maps on 4 different categories. First being monster threat, knowing how threatening the monsters are going to be and how important a jungler style character is going to be to you. Secondly, the terrain impact. So how much are you going to have to think about? Okay, is there a forest here? Is there a wall there? Is there cloud cover there so that my ranged heroes aren't so great? Thirdly, our fate availability. Do you have heroes that are super fate hungry? Well, maybe this map is for them. It's got a ton of fate available. You got monster kills, shrines, things like that that you can easily collect. Or, oh, no, these shrines are going to be hotly contested and there really aren't a lot of monsters to farm, so your fate availability is not going to be great. And then finally, your Soul Gazer value. Now, your Soul Gazer value is primarily going to inform your thinking about picks and bans, where you might ban your opponent's Soul Gazer or make sure you don't drop any Soul Gazer that you brought in your warband because the map has particularly accessible or safe soul pits or things like that. So, Vassal Map 2 is going to be the very first map of round 1, the 5v5 tournament. You can see it's a fairly open map in the center with 2 monsters that are fairly accessible to the top and the bottom sides of the map. Not a lot of terrain in the center. 2 soul pits on the far sides and a central shrine in the middle. Now, in this case, we're looking at a low monster threat because these 2 monster pits are just monsters tiers 1 through 3, which means it's going to be either a Gloom, just 8 health, or an Inferno, which is a little bit more, but still pretty manageable. So we've got a low monster threat here. The terrain, like we already called out, is pretty open in the center. So, and the other thing to look at with the terrain is it close to, say, the soul pits, which are going to be some of the key elements you're going to fight over on the map? And in this case, again, not really. There's an impassable obstruction or object on the right-hand side next to the soul pit, but doesn't do a whole lot except provide a little bit of cover at certain angles. And then on the left-hand soul pit, again, there's kind of a forest there, but it's more than 2 hexes away, so you're not going to be able to use it if you go up to Soul Harvest. So really not all that relevant. So terrain impact on this map is generally low. Fadeability, it's moderate. The main thing here is that you've got that fairly accessible monster pit on for your first turn, so it should be pretty easy to get at least 2 heroes onto that monster. Make sure you guarantee that kill, get the fate bounty, get initial items on heroes that really want it, get that initial level on heroes that want it. So fate ability pretty solid here. You can fight over that central shrine, and especially if fate is important to your warband, you can potentially choose to go second and make sure that you've got a better shot at pushing off enemies from the shrine, getting access to that fate, and making sure that you can fuel your fate abilities of your warband. And finally, the Soul Gazer value on this map, it's moderate, mostly just because you can kind of pick a side, and it's far enough off to the side that your Soul Gazer is not going to be in a lot of threat, and so they can pretty reliably pick up the soul when it does spawn on their side. Fingers crossed you picked the right side to go to begin with. Otherwise, you're just going to have to sort of wait a turn and have your Soul Gazer pick up the soul when it spawns there. But it's all right there. It's moderate, mostly just because your Soul Gazer is going to be fairly safe as they do their job of hovering up the soul. Moving on to round 2, we see Vassal Map number 9. This one, you can see, is very different, and we've gone all red. In this case, we can see 1, 2, 3 monster pits with 2 tier 1 through 3, which means, again, Gloom or Inferno that can spawn. And then in the center cloud, we've got a tier 4 monster, which can be either Terra or Canuck Mara, both of which are incredibly powerful and can put a whole lot of hurt on your warband if you don't plan for it. So here the monster threat is very high. You need a plan for dealing with these monsters. You'll also notice that the monster pits for tier 1 and 3 are pushed out an additional hex as opposed to the previous map we looked at. So it's even harder to get multiple heroes on it, which means it's a lot less likely that you're going to one round it. And in fact, if you try and do a setup where you send the first hero in to push the monster down so that the next hero can follow up and kill it, still got to roll those pushes to get the monster where you want it to be, and sometimes the dice just don't cooperate. So it can be a little risky to go after those tier 1 through 3 monsters, which is why our monster threat overall is high. Terrain impact here, you can see, is gonna be high. The walls get in the way of your first turn monster kill, so unless you've got Pathfinder across your warband, it's gonna be a little tough to get on them. And even then, like on the bottom, that wall's likely going to provide cover to the monster when you're trying to attack, unless you can really position off to the side. But then your hero's sort of out of position way off to the side, and that's not great. So terrain impact on even just those initial walls is pretty tough. But then you can see that central cloud providing invisibility to the middle tier 4 monster, meaning you can't even soften it up with ranged attacks or use abilities on it to maybe push it towards your opponent. Means that monster's gonna be coming for somebody, and there's not a lot you can do about it unless you go into melee. So that central cloud's very relevant. And then finally, the forest, particularly on the left-hand side, you can see it sort of cuts across and not only provides invisibility around the soul pit, but also blocks line of sight, so that if you're on the top side and you're controlling that top side shrine, you are completely out of line of sight, as long as you're adjacent to the shrine, from anyone on the opposite side of the forest, which is great because you still have line of sight to that soul pit. So if you put a soul gazer on that shrine, you can collect from the soul pit while still being relatively safe from your opponent on the other side of the wall. Not to mention there's a monster pit behind there, so they're going to be eventually that monster is going to respawn and come back up. So having a soul gazer on that left-hand shrine on the top's pretty darn safe and pretty powerful. So terrain impact super high on this map. Baitability. This one I'm actually calling high because those shrines are in such sort of side and back positions, either on the top or the bottom. It's kind of difficult to contest them. So as long as you've got a hero that wants to sit on that shrine, on your friendly shrine, and then can contribute either via soul harvesting on the soul pit or in ranged attacks, throwing them out into the board, you're very reliably going to get at least one fate every turn. And then those monsters are going to keep cropping up. The tier 1 through 3 monsters are near that soul pit. They're going to be really relevant. You're going to need to get them killed. But of course, when you do, you get that fate bounty, and that's great. And that tier 4 monster is going to be coming for somebody next to the middle, which ultimately you're also going to have to deal with. So there's going to be a lot of fate flowing on this map, as long as you can chew through the monsters. So a lot of fate for the taking. Finally, we already mentioned the potential soul gazer value of being on that top side shrine and harvesting from the forest. The same is true for the bottom side right shrine, where you can sit on the shrine and harvest directly from the soul pit. You've got a little less protection there, but it's still a great place for your soul gazer to be. So I would say overall high soul gazer value on Vassal Map 9 as well. Moving on to round 3. We have Vassal Map 5. Again, let's go ahead and count the board elements here. We've got actually 3 monster pits, 1 tier 4 and 2 tier 1 through 3s, which is again our Glooms and Infernos on the 1 through 3s and our Tarot Arcana Chimera on the central tier 4. We also now have 3 soul pits bouncing around the map. So 1 soul is going to rotate, spawning around the whole map, which is fairly spread out. That's pretty remarkable. With just the 1 shrine on the left-hand side, for potential fate generation. So, thinking about monsters here, we've got 3 monsters, one of which is a tier 4. You might think, oh man, this is a high monster threat map. Well, I might agree, except for the fact that you should probably just ignore the right-hand side of the map. It's a trap. The only thing you've got there is 1 of 3 soul pits, but then you've got 2 monster spawns right next to it. So anytime you send any of your heroes over that way, maybe you want to pick up that soul pit? Well, you've got a bunch of monsters that are going to come for you if you do that, and you're going to have to spend a whole lot of resources to deal with them. Probably not worth it. So the only reason I would call this map moderate monster threat is because I think 9 times out of 10, you're going to completely ignore the right side of the map. You're just going to shift left. You're going to fight over those 2 soul pits, the shrine, and then have to deal with that tier 4 monster. Now, a tier 4 monster, in and of itself, as long as it's in a relevant position, is at least a moderate threat. So you're going to have to deal with it. Have a plan for that, but otherwise, maybe just stay clear of those tier 1 through 3s on the right hand side of the map. Terrain impact here, pretty high actually. Again, in reference to my assumption that you're going to want to fight on the left-hand side of the map, you've got that forest around the soul pit on the bottom, and the cloud and treacherous ground on the top, with a shrine in the middle. So those are all terrain elements that you're going to need to work around and actually probably benefit from most of the time, especially with the invisibility of the cloud or the forest providing you just a little bit of protection against that central tier 4 monster. So definitely make sure you've got a plan to make use of that terrain. Additionally, you might think that, well, maybe I can pick up that tier 1 to 3 monster on the left-hand side and then pivot left. Well, if you're on the bottom side, that wall will potentially provide that monster cover if you want to go into it turn 1. So you at least need to have a plan around that. Top side, a little bit less relevant if you're going to go for that tier 1 through 3 monster. Got that one hero who can just immediately go in around the forest and not have to worry about it. But again, it's consideration, and I probably wouldn't pivot right anyway. So in general, the terrain on this map that's really relevant is that top cloud and that bottom forest and the shrine in the center that I expect you're going to be fighting over. So watch out for that. Fate availability is moderate. We know that you're going to have to deal with that tier 4 monster. If you can pick up that kill, that bounty, then you'll at least get 2 fate from a Terra, or potentially up to 3 fate if you sell off the Canuck Mara items, or you just get the 1 fate and the 2 really powerful Canuck Mara items. Not a bad trade. And a central shrine, or sorry, a left-hand center shrine to fight over for some more possible fate options. Soul Gazer value here is, I would say, moderate. It's good because, again, if you're fighting over that left-hand side, what's likely going to be your goal or your plan is that you push on your soul pit and hopefully harvest from it. Hopefully you get lucky and that one of the 3 is the one that spawns where you've camped around. But even if not, your plan is probably then going to be push forward into your opponent's soul pit. So if you're on top, push down to the bottom soul pit. If you're on bottom, push up into the top. And having a soul gazer that can reach just 1 hex further for their soul harvest and have just a little bit more soul harvest stat, that soul harvest stat of 6, to pick it up when that soul is contested, likely by your opponent, is going to be valuable to you. Now, bummer there is that right hand soul pit, when it spawns, if it spawns, that's probably going to be a dead turn to you. You absolutely could choose to risk it, or if you've got a soul gazer like Zarin, say, who can send a skeleton all the way off to try and pick up that soul, or maybe even a Zyvera who can reach a little bit further with her Unholy Harvest. Or if maybe you're playing Krognar and you're willing to send your soul gazer there, and then they can just recall for 1 action, get back into position, or use the FG power, etc. Then maybe it's worth it for you. So definitely some opportunities to make good use of a soul gazer on this map, but you do need to be mindful of the soul pit spawns and the clockwise direction it'll flow, and plan ahead for how you're going to best leverage those soul spawns. So that's Vassal Map 5. On to round 4, we've got Vassal Map 7. Now, this one has actually recently changed. It used to be that cloud was in the dead center on top of the soul pit, giving it invisibility. And we just had a recent modification where it shifted a bit over to the right, and that makes this map super interesting to me. So let's again look at the monster spawns. We've got a monster tier 1 and through 3, again, Gloom or Inferno, in sort of the central line, but kitty corner across from each other. And then a tier 4 monster that's coming in from the right-hand side that is much more relevant to the top side player than the bottom side player, because the top side player's got that tier 1 through 3 monster that they kind of want to pick up as a kill, even though it exposes you to having that tier 4 monster come for you on turn 2. And that's really the gamble that you're going to have to decide is worth it to you or not. You can see those tier 1 through 3 monster pits are super central. They're pushed. You're going to have to extend really far to get to those monsters. And if you're on the bottom side, that means you're kind of making those heroes irrelevant for turn 2. in order to get that monster kill on turn 1. So you have to decide for yourself if that's worth it. And then on the top side, not only are you somewhat out of position, you're going to have a tier 4 monster bearing down on you if you've gone for that kill. With luck, you'll get pushes, so you'll get that tier 1 through 3 monster kill on the top side, and then get pushes to push into the cloud. That'll give you invisibility, which will give you some protection against, say, a Terra rock throw or a blast from K'Neuk but sometimes the dice don't cooperate, so that's definitely a gamble. So I would say it's a manageable monster threat, but still moderate. Still something you're gonna have to plan around. Uh, Terrain impact here, again, it's sort of like the previous map we had, where we've got that penetrating forest coming from the left and that cloud just off right that are going to be very relevant. The walls are mostly present to make your turn 1 monster kill annoying and slightly difficult. So I would say overall a moderate terrain impact here. It's definitely going to be something you think about, plan around, and interact with. But it's not going to completely shift because of that central open area where around the soul pit and the 2 shrines, there isn't a lot of terrain, so it's a fairly open space where ranged aggressors could excel. Fadeability on this map is again high because the shrines are both further back and pretty difficult to contest. So at the very least, you'll have a pretty reliable 1 fate every turn, plus any souls that you pick up or monster kills that you pick up. And then this being a single soul pit map, soul gazers can absolutely take advantage of just sitting near a single soul pit and harvesting every single turn until you win, demanding that your opponent either contest that soul gazer, shove them off the soul pit, get the soul for themselves, or lose the game. So even this map even has a little spot you can tuck a soul gazer in, either above or below that inhospitable ground, that obstruction there next to the cloud. Now it's important to call out that a single hex in Judgement never blocks line of sight. So even if you're sort of tucked there between or next to the cloud and the obstruction there in the center, you're still going to be your opponent's still going to be able to draw line of sight to you through that 1 hex inhospitable ground, or sorry, impassable terrain, I believe it's called. But you'll at least get cover there, so you'll be a bit more protected against range attacks and even melee attacks if they're coming from a certain angle. So Soul Gazer value, I would say, high on this map, and definitely a lot of interesting things going on here. I really like the revisions to map 7. I'm excited to see how it plays out. Round 5. Well, round 5 is only going to be played between the top 2 players in the final if it's necessary. So if you got to here, you probably don't need my advice, but I guess I'll comment on it anyway. So here again, looking at the elements on the map, we've got 3 monster pits. This time though, a tier 4 way off to the left, and then a tier 1. It is only going to be a gloom that can spawn either immediately above or below the shrine. Fairly low monster threat. A gloom is pretty predictable and reliable in terms of how you can deal with it. You are going to have to, because of the positioning, any hero that can charge 5 hexes, standard threat range, is not going to be able to get on that gloom immediately. So you're going to have some setup. You're going to have to advance some other hero forward and charge, and then set up the kill with somebody next. But it's just a gloom. Should be fine. Not that big of a deal unless your dice totally abandon you. But and that tier 4 monster is far enough off to the side that if as long as you don't dive into it, you can kind of ignore it. So monster threat fairly low on this map. Terrain impact, again, we're looking at the fairly open center of this map. Yes, there's a shrine. You can get a little bit of cover, but you probably actually don't want to hang out near the shrine too much because you're going to have those glooms respawning. And so if you're either immediately on the top or bottom, you're going to get bit as soon as that gloom respawns. And if even then, if you're just within 1 hex of it, it's pretty easier for your opponent to push you into a gloom spawn, which can be a bad time. So other than that, it's pretty open in the center. There's no real terrain within 2 hexes of the 2 soul pits. So I would say overall low terrain impact on this map. Fate availability on the other hand is fairly high. These blooms are pretty easy to farm for fate. You just make sure you can kill them pretty quickly. There's also a shrine on the far right hand side, which is basically uncontested by any sort of board element, any monsters. It's going to be really safe. So what you're likely going to want to do is, in general, fight on the right-hand side of this map. You can then focus your efforts on dominating that soul pit on the right-hand side, collecting fate from the shrine on the right-hand side, and opportunistically grabbing fate from the center shrine, whilst the two monsters in the center always come from a predictable direction for you, and you can make sure that you have a plan to deal with them as they come in. So if you play your cards right, I think fate ability should be pretty good for you on this map. Soul Gazer value here, I would say, is moderate, mostly just because it's going to be kind of a single soul pit map, depending on how you play it, where the right-hand soul pit is going to be pretty important to be able to harvest from. But there are certain soul gazers, like, again, say Zarin with his skeletons, where he can send out a skeleton, and even if the skeleton gets the harvest, because Zarin can harvest through the skeleton, it's not like the soul's bound to the skeleton and that tier 4 monster is going to go attack you and you lose the soul. You don't really care if the skeleton dies. So again, Zarin, Zivera, or potentially even a level 3 Saiyan who can collect a soul and then immediately bank them, or any Soul Gazer that you're playing in Ragnar, can give you some opportunity to grab that left-hand soul pit. So in general, I would say Soul Gazer value moderate on this map. You can definitely make good use of Soul Gazers given the soul pit set up there. And that takes us through all of the maps in our Adepticon tournament pack. If hopefully that's helpful to you. I will actually be going to Adepticon and playing myself. I'm gonna probably playing a fairly straightforward Berlin Warband or something like that just lets me charge forward and smash face, because thinking about this game is hard in the game, and I take way too long to do it. So I find if I keep things simple for myself, that's probably best. But if you end up making it to Adepticon, definitely feel free to say hi. Be happy to chat with you. I'll put a link down to the Adepticon tournament pack in the description, as well as the Longshanks link, which is what we're using to register for the tournament and track it. For sort of stats, not like you have to sign up for Adepticon. You already did that, hopefully, with your Adepticon registration. But that's ultimately the tournament software that'll be used for the game, and gives nerds like me access to fun stats to look at afterwards and analyze. So hopefully that was a helpful overview of the maps that we'll be playing in the Adepticon's 5s game. And we'll see you either at Adepticon or just in the between. Thanks, and have a good one.